Hello, today you're listening to Tempus, and the discussion here today is of Adnan Syed, who was convicted guilty for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Heyman Lee, had a fair trial. There are many people who feel as if he was wrongfully convicted owing to the fact that they were introduced to this cold case by Sarah Koenig, a reporter from the podcast called Serial. They may think that she was reasonable when she presented the information to her listeners. However, she was not. Her words were riddled with bias, and instead she made conclusions by being subjective with facts that she presented to her listeners. Here are some points that are not often brought up in discussions when debating whether Adnan's trial was fair or not. It's assumed that Adnan's initial lawyer, Christina Gutierrez, did not attempt to contact Asia McClain, who she claims that she saw Adnan in the library during the assumed timeline of Hayes' murder. This does not prove that Gutierrez was to squander Adnan's opportunity to not serve life in prison. No, because she could have known that Adnan is guilty, so therefore she must abide by the law as to not testify with false evidence. And if she had known that he was not innocent, presenting an alibi, McClain would be presenting false evidence. Another explanation here could be that Asia McClain mixed up the day that she saw Adnan, when the murder took place on the 13th of January, or that she could have mixed up the time and would not prove helpful for Adnan. Also, her story has no physical proof, such as a surveillance recording of him in the library at the presumed time, so the jury members may have seen it to be an avoid jail for free card given to Adnan. Therefore, Gutierrez had not made a desperate attempt to contact McClain. For your information, Gutierrez had knowingly turned her cross-examination of Jay into a way to make Jay appear as if he was a loser, but Jay's inconsistencies were quite minor, compared to how Sarah deliberately tried to paint him to be a compulsive liar. Jay also spoke out on how Koenig's podcast Serial painted him to be this nefarious liar, but he said how the Baltimore Police Department wanted his story filled up with facts. That is why his story varied from those different interviews. And yes, it's true that witnesses who do lie should be treated with caution. However, the stories of those who lie should not have their story discredited. In Jay's case, the base of his testimonies were stable, such as his descriptions of what happened after Hayes' murder, the cell phone records that strongly suggest that Adnan was present, especially the Nisha call that comes right in the middle of the timeline that subsequently took place after Hayes' murder. During that time, Adnan claimed he was at track practice, and how Jay let the police ride to Hayes' abandoned car that he said they deserted. Most importantly, Jay risked his life admitting his involvement, such as helping Adnan bury Hayes' body, which he had known that could have resulted in doing jail time, which nonsensically would be a huge thing to lie about. So initially, he would have had a good reason to lie about his involvement in Hayes' case. Also, it would be unsurprising that he lied to protect himself and others, like his grandmother, whose house he was dealing drugs out of, and his girlfriend Stephanie, who he said that Adnan would harm if he did not help him. Being an accomplice in a murder case is nothing minor. Plus his drug dealing to high schoolers, his plea could have led to him serving time in jail. Since Jay avoided jail time completely, it could be assumed that he lied about something big, which in consequence could make him appear guilty. But in reality, if he had not come forward, both he and Adnan would walk the streets. So the million-dollar question here is why admit to a serious offense that could have landed him in jail, yet blame Adnan, who many think he is a completely innocent person, if those claims were groundless. The main reason why Adnan is serving jail time to this day is not because the trial was unfair, it was because Adnan had not testified. The investigation and prosecution was not unethical. Apparently, the prosecution's case against Adnan was substantial enough to put him away for life. So Adnan had chose not to rebut Jay's allegation, with no explanation as for why his phone pinged during those key times at those places. However, we only hear Adnan's side from Serial. The jury in 1999 had not. Consequently, it is easy to proclaim that Adnan did not have a fair trial after listening to a tape or two from Serial, which again subjectively presents information from a subconsciously subjective Koenig. So Adnan's descriptions of those events could lead to the distortion of his many fans who are utterly infatuated with him. Oh, and if Adnan was to be cross-examined, that would have most certainly squashed his credibility. And here I present to you 6 reasons why Adnan had chosen not to testify. Or if I were to cross-examine Adnan, it would be due to the overwhelming contrast of his 3 back-to-back-to-back calls with his ex, Hay, the night before she died. To quote, getting his information out of, end quotes, their friend Asia by having her to reach Hay through calls. I would also contrast his claimed lack of relationship with Jay to him lending his car plus phone over to him for a chunk of that day on Hay's murder. I would also present contradicting examples to his claimed loss of interest in Hay by observing his body language, tone, and use of words. I would hit him with a nail on the head by asking whether he wrote "I will kill" on the note that Hay wrote to him out of frustration, or if he denied writing that. Ask what that message conveyed to him, because a fact presented could be utterly different from its interpretation, which Koenig had appallingly brushed under the rug, has to show the depth of her subconscious favoritism towards him. Ask why he was hasty to get rid of his high at Kathy's place, what things he had to do, who he was talking to on the phone, of his uncertainty of giving an explanation to someone or some people, and why him and Jay had worryingly got out of the house just to talk inside his car for 20 minutes. If he said that he could not remember, I would argue the improbability of that, given how well he remembers the call from both Hay's brother and Adcock shortly before. Ask why he first claimed to ask his ex Hay for a ride, then denied subsequently. Ask him if it's due to the realization of knowing he would be put with the murder victim shortly before she was killed. Furthermore, this should reassure people that Adnan did have a fair trial. So, if Koenig was adamant on determining objectively whether he was wrongfully convicted, she should have hired a legal consultant to help inquire if Adnan would have lost more than his dignity at the end of the day, if he had chosen to testify at his trial. And this music comes from YouTube.